also work in the private sector.
Cool. So how long have you been working for LAUSD for?
This is my 9th school year.
Okay, awesome.
Yeah.
And how's that been going, especially on Zoom for you?
Definitely has its challenges. I mean, in general, I'm from New York originally, so having to be accustomed to the West Coast and then LAUSD being like the second largest school district in the nation was also a huge adjustment. So always something new to learn. Yeah. And I mean, the perk of that is you get to see such a diverse population because I service a bunch of different schools within LA Unified. So it's a special environment there.
How many schools are you currently at for LA Unified?
So I, excuse me, I am at one elementary school 1.5 days a week, and then the other 3.5 days I'm going around the west area of LA Unified. So I would say the Pacific Palisades on down to Westchester and inland to Westwood. I work with predominantly non-speaking, motorically impaired students that need AAC systems, which is augmentative and alternative communication. So everyone associates that with like, oh, so you give out iPads. But it's a lot more than that. But yes, that is one of the things that I do. So within that, I wouldn't even know how many schools that is, but I would say probably at least 30, but I'm not working directly. It's more of like a support and a consultative service.
Gotcha. So do you do currently AAC device assessments for students?
So we do assessments as well as support training hours, implementation hours, and troubleshooting. As you noted earlier, technology is always failing. So there's always something there.
Yeah, they put brand new systems in these classrooms and it just has it on me instead of on my students like it was in the other class. So I wanted to have you large and in charge on our big, nice projector, but that's not what's happening today. So everybody's looking at you on their little devices, on their computers, and it's not the most ideal situation, but we're going to make the best of it. And I'll try to fix it for next time because most people come in on Zoom because it's easier. So
Right.
we'll try to make this as best as possible, but thank you for
Yeah.
being flexible for my students that are making it work right now. So
No problem.
yeah. So what I would like to do, we kind of make this like an open Q&A for my question, for my students here. This is a careers class in child development. And basically what I love for them to have actual people that do this job. It's one thing if I tell you about it, but it's great from the horse's mouth of someone that actually does this job. So what I'm going to do is open it up to my students now, and everybody, you can throw it in the chat. And what I'll do is just read the questions to Jen, and then we'll kind of go from there. There you go. Now you're good. It's good. So technical difficulties, we've got people on mute and we're getting it going still. But if you can just describe like a day in the life for you as a speech and language pathologist, and then I'll give everybody an opportunity to throw their questions in the chat for you.
Okay. So when I'm at my elementary school, there's also a state preschool attached. So there's 3 to 11-year-olds. Elementary school, there's some special day classes within there, which predominantly are, fall under an autism eligibility or a specific learning disability. So there you have everything from like dyslexia to ADHD, those that, they're a mix of going mainstreaming into the gen ed and whatnot. So dependent on the student, I'm either pulling them to the speech room to work on their IEP goals, or I'm pushing into the classroom. It all just depends on the student. When I first got there, it was just getting to know the kids, so I knew what would be most functional and powerful for that given child. There's also IEP meetings, which aren't my favorite. but it's a good opportunity to meet with the parents. I have to say, like, COVID was the pandemic, being that I was working with elementary school students and those that need greater levels of support. It was nice because I had that open dialogue with parents on a weekly basis when usually it's like a yearly basis. So they got to see what my job was like. Usually when I go and pick up the kids, they immediately ask what game they're going to play today. Because they're elementary school, it's a lot of game-based activities. Sometimes I'm looking at testing, so I will pick them up from class and I'll say, we're going to look at some pictures today, and we're going to fully look into whether it be how they say their sounds or how they respond and formulate language. And then the testing part of the job, a day in the life, would be emails, either Zoom or in-person trainings. I think everyone's now adapted to the potential for Zoom trainings instead of having it to be in person, because as you all understand, LA traffic can be a beast. So it makes more effective use of the time if you can accomplish it through a virtual platform. So testing kids, therapy, IEP meetings, emails, walking around trying to find where the kids are on campus sometimes it's a good movement break for me. That's kind of a day in the life.
So how does that differ? So that's like your LA Unified job, right? So now if you move into your private practice, what does that look like? And is it different from your LA Unified normal job?
Yeah, so I go in the home for the private sector. I address, sometimes these kids wouldn't necessarily qualify for in-school services because they're young and they have a speech sound that typically is acquired a little bit later in childhood development, but parents foresee it being a potential need and they want it to be addressed. So I make that determination once I see them. And I also do AAC assessments privately as well. So if a parent needs support and implementation of a given device, they can reach out and say, hey, I got this equipment from the school district, haven't really gotten much training. Are you familiar? Can you help me? A lot more parent involvement just because they are more invested, both financially and time-wise.
That's a good segue for me. And then I have a couple questions for my students. When you do your AAC device assessments, are you vendored with Regional Center or take insurance, or is it all private pay?
So usually it's through an independent evaluation. So they get an approval through their school district, whether it be the school district had outright refused an assessment for whatever reason, or they don't have the personnel that specializes in AAC. So they'll contract out. But I do, like, within the LAUSD position of AAC consultant, we do work with CCS, California, I forget even what it stands for. For me, it's the whole, like, they're aging out. We need to figure out equipment to follow them after they graduate. And for that, it's age 22, they get to keep the equipment for 3 months if it's district provided. And then we're looking at other avenues with which to support that implementation.
Yeah, just because they're 22 doesn't mean they don't need their AAC device anymore.
Right, right.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Interesting. All right, let's get into my students' questions. So the first one is from Shannon. She said, what is the most difficult part of your job? And then I'm also gonna get into her second question. So what's the most difficult part of your job, Jen?
Let's see. Well, being a speech pathologist, you're part of a team and it's a collaborative process, which I find amazing. But at times there has to be some compromise in order to get what you need accomplished. So I find sometimes with scheduling or planning and prep, I'm fortunate with AAC that my caseload isn't too high, but a lot of SLPs in my position will say, I don't have time enough to delegate, the treatment that a child needs. So I know that that's really frustrating. Sometimes carryover at home is a challenge, whether it be, COVID gave that unique perspective where you can actually get a glimpse at the home life and maybe have a little bit more empathy for where these kids are coming from. But supporting them at home and having realistic expectations. Yeah, the hardest part of my job. I don't know. I try and make it a plus. Like every day is different, which is great for some people, not so great for others. Yeah. I don't know. IEP meetings can be very long. Those aren't very fun.
No, definitely not.
Yeah. And challenging behaviors. I think that would be really difficult. You have kids sometimes that they don't have the language to say why they're upset, or maybe it's sensory regulation and they're just getting up and being aggressive. That's definitely a challenge. Yeah.
And so Shannon's second part of her question, she says, what do you do to take time for yourself? Like, what's your self-care plan, Jen?
Ooh, great question. I love that you guys are thinking about that, because being that I'm fortunate enough to travel to a bunch of schools, it seems like, a lot of times the speech pathologist is kind of on their island at the school, that they don't get to talk to anybody except for other students. So when I get there, it's a lot of vent session. And I'm always the big advocate, like the same question that you just posed as far as what are you doing for yourself? So I try and I make time for myself in the morning and I'll work out before going to work. On the weekend, I do not, unless absolutely necessary, but I do not do work on the weekends. That's like my sacred time. Sometimes I'll have private clients be like, hey, are you open on Saturdays? And technically, yes, I am, but I say no, I am not. And getting outside. Yeah. Yeah, that's for me, is the getting outside, surfing and whatnot. That's my bliss.
Yeah, we were talking about at the beginning of the semester, something that our students, as they come back, some of them have never been to campus ever. And it's the
Yeah.
first time coming back, and it is overwhelming, and traffic and all the things that we didn't have to deal with for quite a long time. So it's just challenging them to find one thing that they can do for themselves once a week at least, right? To do some self-care, some self-soothing for themselves to make it through this semester. So I think that's a great, thank you, Shannon, for asking that question too. All
Yeah,
right.
I think with district, at least through LA Unified, they were doing school headspace. I know it sounds super corny. I originally gave myself the big eye roll, like, oh, you're not going to help me during a global pandemic, but here's a free subscription to Headspace. But I have found that to be really like grounding.
Can you describe Headspace if my students
Oh,
don't know
sorry.
what it is?
Headspace is like a guided meditation app. So I have it set to remind me to breathe. There's a 1 minute breathing exercise where you count in for 5, hold for 5, and then blow out for 5. And I even do it with my students, especially when they're getting super agitated or fidgety, or, you know what, we're not really connecting here. Let's take a moment. I call it the volcano breath. So they'll just, yeah.
Yeah, no, that's great. I call it balloon breathing, or we do like the cupcake breath, right? Where you're trying to blow
Yeah.
out the candle. So depending on the kid, depending on what they can do, we're trying to figure out some way to get them to breathe a little bit more. Next
Yeah.
question comes from my student Kayla. She says, when having to remove the child from their peers, so that they can work with you, is it a struggle due to them being embarrassed or having extra help? So what do you do if that's the case for your students?
So if that's the case, like, I'll get a read on it. The kindergartners are usually super excited, where I'll have some some new friends come up to me and be like, oh, it's my turn, right? And it's like, no, maybe next time, but like never. And then, those older kids, they definitely become more aware of their differences. And I will arrange, some of them you can ask straight up, oh, it seems like you're a little timid, or, let's work something out. Like, how about, after recess that you need to come to speech. So when everyone's getting water and whatnot, your teacher already knows where you're going to be. You come to me, or I'll call the classroom as opposed to showing up. But fortunately, I don't see much of that at the elementary school level. I think that's more of like middle and high school. Yeah. And that's tough. That's really tough.
Absolutely. All right. Does anyone else have other questions for Jen? Because I'm going to ask you a couple more if they have not. Go ahead and put it in the chat, guys. We only have about 10 minutes left of class anyway, Jen. So,
Okay.
but we'll kind of get into a couple other questions that I have. If anybody else has any, go ahead and put it in the chat real quick. So we'll give them a moment to do that. But I'll ask you a question in the interim. So can you kind of walk us through your, like, where you went to undergrad, your graduate school / fellowship / internship? What did you have to do to become a speech and language pathologist?
So when I graduated, or when I was graduating high school, I knew that I wanted to play basketball. That was pretty much it. So I ended up and I was living in New York. So I went to a state university of New York for undergrad at Portland, which is near Syracuse, and very, very cold and lots of snow. And I played basketball there. And I went for undergrad, which was speech and hearing science. So I could have gone audiology or speech. I decided to go to the speech route after I observed and kind of shadowed people in both those professions to see, a day in the life and literally walk in, their path that way. So then when I determined that I wanted to go for speech pathology, I knew it was a master's program, and I applied to Hunter College, which was the City University of New York. While I was there, LAUSD came to New York City to recruit speech pathologists, because there's always been a need for speech pathologists, and I feel like it's going to be even more so now. And so through grad school, I had experiences. I thought I wanted to do hospital, adult care, but I ended up doing the complete opposite. So I was interning at a neurogenic rehab facility. So a lot of Parkinson's and multiple sclerosis and that sort of thing. And it was great working with the adults, but then I worked with a special education preschool, and that was a lot of fun. And then in elementary school, predominantly with deaf and hard of hearing, and then autism was their primary caseload. And I was like, you know what? I love working in the schools. That's what I'm going to do. So I interviewed for LAUSD, and they offered me the position. And then I moved across the country, had my clinical fellowship year with LA Unified, which I've heard it's hard to do, like to find clinical fellowships that are paid well and that you're supervised appropriately. So LAUSD does follow the rules in that regard. So yeah, and now originally it was just, I was at 3 schools servicing kids, but then I applied for the special assignment position of an AAC consultant. So I was offered that position, and now I'm a senior AAC consultant with 2 other colleagues for the district. So yeah, that was my timeline journey.
How long did that take you from undergrad to finishing your kind of fellowship and all of that to being licensed? How long did that take you?
Undergrad, did you say undergrad or just grad?
Yeah, undergrad.
Undergrad was 4 years. The grad was 2 years with the summer in between. And then and I did that right after, while I was undergrad, I was taking the GREs and applying to schools, just because I knew what I wanted to do and I knew I needed a master's to practice. So, and then one school year with LA Unified, I was completely licensed because it's just a certain number of hours of supervision and full-time employment, and then you are fully certified.
So about 3 years post undergrad, correct?
Correct. Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
All right, so we have a couple more questions, and then thank you. I first of all wanted to thank you for coming in today and being here. I haven't seen Jen. So Jen and I actually play dodgeball together. So I have not seen Jen. I haven't played dodgeball in over 2 years. So, but I appreciate you coming in and being here with us on Zoom. But there's a couple more questions to get through. Just thanking you for your time today. So.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Of course. All right. So Taylor asks, how did COVID affect you at work, and how does a virtual, how does it work virtually, basically?
I think like everyone, I was in a panic when it happened. I am so used to doing speech therapy, and if a kid is not vibing with it, I'll like reach behind me and grab another game or another activity. So the fact that it was a virtual platform, it definitely was a learning curve. I had to get creative in my materials. Like I mentioned earlier, a lot of parent involvement. So for those that all of us were working from home, so I was able to see them more often, and they were able to see what I was doing, which they didn't get to prior. Even though I would explain it, they wouldn't have the context. But now that they were seeing it in practice, they would then practice it at home. So that was really cool. I saw progress in some kids that I didn't, anticipate, just because of the challenges and the supports that are needed. I missed walking around. Like I definitely walk around campus to get the kids. So sitting here and like just letting people in from the waiting room. I don't know how anybody can do a desk job. That would just suck my soul, I think. And yeah, virtual learning didn't work for every kid. There's definitely, I notice a shift in kids coming back. They're maybe a little less engaged, less confident being in groups, and you have to be sensitive to that when you're working with them. So personally, even though it's driven by IEP mandated goals, my priority is just making sure that the kid's engaged and like happy to be there. Because I think that that's so much more important than like meeting an IEP goal. So yeah.
All right, I'm gonna ask you one more question because that's all the time we have for today. Sure. So Martin asks, how come some students start speech therapy midway through school tenure as like third graders potentially, compared to maybe earlier, like first, second grade, or even in kindergarten?
So some kids start receiving, maybe parents are super concerned and they'll reach out to their pediatrician, which will then give referrals to a regional center or other speech pathologists, and they'll qualify that way. So there's early intervention for 0 to 3, and then you can access regional center services from 3 to 5 is my understanding, or 0 to 3, I guess. And then you can continue on from there. And then sometimes, dependent on what the needs are in the classroom, it's more of a red flag than others. So let's say you're in kindergarten and the kid can't say his R. He's like, oh yeah, it's wed, meaning red. It's like, okay, we'll keep an eye on that. But typically the R doesn't come in until like first or second grade. So maybe we'll see him like once a month and give the teacher some strategies to work on. But if it doesn't remediate itself, then we'll look at a full assessment. And obviously, as you all know, as you grow older, the challenges with school and reading and writing increase. So sometimes those challenges don't really appear until they're tested, later on in academics. So. Yeah.
All right, cool. Well, thank you so much for coming in today, Jen. I really,
You're
really appreciate it.
welcome.
I hope we can throw dodgeballs at each other at some point, in the next couple years
Yeah.
here, but so thank you so much for coming in
Welcome.
today. I appreciate it. Okay. Well, take
You're
care. Have a
welcome.
good day. See you soon, hopefully.
Bye.
Bye.